One of the things I'm going to do on this channel is to provide brief, short little reviews or introductions really to some of the best history books that are out there for the YouTube viewer, the intelligent citizen, the person who's interested in geopolitics to read, to really understand the emerging multipolar world a lot better. And a few weeks ago, just before Christmas or in December 2022, I released a video that talked about 5 top books on top history books on geopolitics. There's a lot on YouTube, on BookTube about fantasy and fiction and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think there's a lot on BookTube about really good history books. So hopefully that's a bit of a gap that I can fill. And there was a really strong response to my video on the 5 top books on geopolitics, 5 top history books on geopolitics. And so this is a bit of a follow-up video, and it's looking at some books which were actually identified by one of the viewers to the channel, Peter Frankopan's book, The Silk Roads and the New Silk Roads. My copy of The Silk Roads is on my Kindle, so I can only show you my copy of The New Silk Roads, which is there, which is kind of Peter Frankopan's follow-up to The Silk Roads, and produced a couple of years later, which looks really more at the contemporary world rather than the historical world. His book, The Silk Roads, was enormously successful, a huge bestseller, and certainly established his, strengthened his reputation. The Silk Roads is a great book. It covers a lot of the similar sort of ground, I guess, to what John Darwin and others cover in After Tamerlan, but it really tells the story of Eurasia and the history of the last few thousand years, not from the perspective of the West, but from the perspective of Eurasia, in particular, the Silk Roads, the routes from China through Central Asia onto Russia and onto the Byzantium Empire, onto India and onto Europe. And these Silk Roads he really uses as a metaphor, I guess, throughout his book. And he describes the dynamism and the important developments, so many of the fundamentally important developments in history, such as the Byzantine Empire, such as the Arab Caliphate, the Mughals, all sorts of the rise of China and all sorts of other things, using this metaphor of the Silk Roads. So it's a really fabulous book. It is especially strong, I find, on resources and, I guess, economic trade sort of history. Frankopan himself, his speciality is as a Byzantine historian, so the chapters about the Eastern Roman Empire are especially good and really worthwhile reading. So totally recommend The Silk Roads as a book. And also, if you're interested especially in geopolitics and the emergence of the multipolar world, The New Silk Roads, Peter Frankopan's sort of follow-up, The Present and Future of the World, no less, which he published in 2018, is a really good overview, I guess, of that, the emerging multipolar world, written before the pandemic, Sort of reflecting, I guess, the perspectives of that time, and also written after Brexit and after the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And to some degree, those two events lie as a bit of a shadow over Peter Frankopan's book, and perhaps unduly influence it. There is just, for myself, and especially now that, Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States, we don't have to be fixated on Donald Trump any longer. Unless, I guess, we're a voter in America, then there's just a little bit too much attention to Donald Trump, a few too many sort of jibes and whatnot about Donald Trump in this story. But nonetheless, he provides a really excellent analysis of the big, large infrastructure, resource economy transactions, and emerging international institutions around Eurasia, around, I guess, China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the new dynamism, not just economic, but social, political, and cultural, in the whole Eurasian region, and especially Central Asia. So he covers the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, he covers the Eurasian Economic Order, he covers a whole set of developments, and he also provides a bit of a really quite excellent briefing book, if you like, around all these states. Like China, I guess, is well known, and there's a really good chapter on China and Russia. I don't think as good a chapter on Russia, because I think Peter Frankopan's a little bit too influenced by the kind of British establishment view of Russia, which you can look at more in my podcast, my episodes on or videos on the Black Legend of Russian history. But Peter Frankopan's account of this emerging new world order is really quite fabulous. And it's just so that you get a sense of what the book is structured like. He talks about the roads to the east, the roads, which is China, the roads to the heart of the world, Central Asia, the roads to Beijing, the roads to rivalry, and the roads to the future. And towards the end of the book, he makes a crucial comment, which I think is even more true today than when he wrote it in 2018 or 2017, which is that he comments that the West has lost its bearings and is losing its way in a changing world. The rise of this new world is taking place before us, driven by shifts in power that are so profound that it is hard to see how they can be stopped, slowed down, or held back, except by the forces of conflict, disease, and climate change that have played such important roles in the past in shaping world history and redirecting and reshaping the present and future. And he goes on to say, and after he describes the growth of the Asian century, the growth of the new international institutions like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the development of some of these enormous transport and infrastructure projects across Eurasia, he comments that what is striking, however, as new connections forge and old links are renewed, is that the West is in danger of becoming less and less relevant. When the West does engage and play a role, it is invariably to intervene or interfere in ways that create more problems than they solve, or to place obstacles and restrictions in place that limit the growth and prospects of others. The age of the West shaping the world in its image is long gone, although that seems to have been lost on those who think that managing the fates of others is appropriate and even possible. And so he has a message to, I guess, the political elite of America that the days of think tankers in America sitting behind desks and determining the world order are over. It is time to return to the track of diplomacy and dialogue between peers, and not just assume that America dominates the world. And this is really how he concludes his book. It's quite fascinating, really. He says, and this is from the last 2 pages of the book, "Forces of instability, it seems, are in the eye of the beholder. When branding other states as destabilizing, it is easy to take a rose-tinted view or even forget the impact that US intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan has had in the last 15 years, a bit longer now, to say nothing of decades going back to the middle of the 20th century. The belief that it is other states that cause problems poses questions about which lessons from history, if any, are learned in Washington. Trading Ukraine for Syria is one thing. Being blind to the irony of accusing others of being disruptive is another." And this statement is even more relevant today, which means these books by Peter Frankopan are really worth reading, even if they're now maybe a couple of years out of date. But he goes on, from the perspective of the US then, something seems to have gone badly wrong with the spine of the Silk Roads, where China, Russia, and Iran, 3 of the largest and most important states in the world, are deemed to pose a direct threat to the US and a threat to global stability. 2 others, Turkey and Pakistan, are seen to be cancerous problems that can only be dealt with aggressively, while the experiences of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan provide salutary lessons on how interventions do not often go to plan. And I haven't really tracked Peter Frankopan's comments on the Ukraine situation, but surely he would probably agree that things have not gone to plan. The Washington plan, the Washington consensus in Ukraine in this year. So really worth reading. As he says at the end, the Silk Roads are rising. These powers, these great powers of China, Russia, Iran, you'd have to add in India, the spine of the Silk Road, the spine of Eurasia, are really reshaping the world. And Peter Frankopan's 2 books, The Silk Roads and The New Silk Roads, are really fantastic introductions to the topic. And you can also check out, Peter Frankopan did a podcast for about a year or so, which has some really fascinating interviews, and he's quite active on Twitter, and he also recently appeared on the Empire podcast. I'll include a link below to that. So he's very much a good, serious, but common language historian who has a really good practical and not, Atlanticist or Eurocentric sort of viewpoint on the changing world order. And if you read his books, you'll really have a better understanding of just how strong the forces are about the creation of this new multipolar world, and how it's kind of a return to a historical normal, a genuine shift in the sources of initiative, of economic cooperation, and in a way, a true blessing of cultural, social, political diversity in the world, that we should see these states, which some might describe as axis of autocracy or axis of evil, are in fact the rising Silk Road powers of the world, new multipolar world. So check out Peter Frankopan's book on the Silk Roads and the new Silk Roads. I've got links to where you can get those books in the video description below. And do check out my other more recent videos that are reviewing the Russia-Ukraine NATO war and the overall stories that we can tell based on a wide reading of history about how our world is changing before our eyes. Subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you soon again on the Birding Archive YouTube channel.